Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Pat Brown. Today, we're going to focus on Pillar 2 from a different direction, inbound. And here to shed some light on inbound issues related to Pillar 2 are Neil Edwards and Rob Stout. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, so Neil, I'm going to start with you. So we talk a lot to US MNCs. A lot of our viewing audience, of course, are US MNCs. For non-US headquartered MNCs, Pillar 2 is a reality already. So these are, in many cases, we're talking about companies that are having to apply Pillar 2 concepts across their entire structure, as opposed to a lot of US MNCs who they've got a number of QDMTT jurisdictions, but thinking about IIRs and issues like that, at least across their entire structure, not yet an issue. So maybe to start with you, Neil, in terms of things like operational readiness, how are these companies approaching the here and now of Pillar 2 across the entirety of their structure?
Yeah, well, Pat, I think Pillar 2 has come awful quick for a lot of companies. We had a very short period of time, and like you say, companies which are headquartered in most of the EU, the UK, Japan, Australia, Canada, they're now having to adopt these rules fully. And I still see a lot of companies which are approaching it from almost like a two-track perspective. One is still trying to do more high-level modeling, trying to understand impact assessment. What's the cost going to be? Can I focus in on the countries where maybe it's more material to me, or like there's more likely to be an issue? But then the bigger thing that's looming is the whole, well, how do I actually fully comply with these rules? Data readiness, where do I get the information from? How am I going to fill the returns out? Like, how do I make all these different adjustments? And technology solutions and things like that. So I think they are, they're still in the same position a lot of our US MNCs that there's a lot of work to do, but it's just it's really looming pretty quick for them.
Right. How about you, Rob? What are you seeing?
Very similar. I think a real focus on operational readiness, kind of as this becomes a reality, the sheer magnitude of the lift here and the number of key stakeholders that it touches. I think many times in the past there's a change in tax law. It's really focused on the tax department. I think it's becoming really apparent to many of our inbound companies that this is much broader than that. And we need buy-in, it's more of a transformation type project where you need buy-in across the board. And so bringing that all together in a very tight timeline is a challenge that we see companies trying to work through.
So turning our attention back to the United States, we know that within the United States, one of the real flashpoints in the Pillar 2 discussion has been the potential application of Pillar 2 on the U.S. income of U.S. companies. Things like the U.S. R&D credit, FDII, accelerated depreciation, all these things that can end up having an effect on your rate. For U.S. headquartered multinationals, of course, this is a tomorrow problem. For non-U.S. headquartered multinationals with U.S. subs, those calculations are very real starting this year. So maybe, Rob, staying with you, how is this being addressed? Is it coming up as, wow, we could be below 15% in the U.S., and how do we think about safe harbors in that context? Maybe give us some perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's coming as revelations. I think there's been warning signs, frankly, but I think there are very unique challenges around the U.S. tax system that our foreign-based multinationals don't really encounter with many of the other jurisdictions. And so we're just uniquely placed with the U.S. tax system, whether just the number of deviations from book income that goes into a tax calculation. Many of our inbound U.S. multinationals also have CFCs. So you're having to deal with the interaction of GILTI and BEAT and CAMT, all of these unique systems to the U.S. and how does that fit within the broader Pillar 2 calculation? And where we're seeing, there's an attempt to have kind of a standardized approach for every jurisdiction where there's a questionnaire that goes out and it fits very nicely for many jurisdictions. It doesn't fit so nicely for the U.S. in many cases. So there's an educational aspect that we are working very closely with our clients on. Well, how do you approach the U.S. and how does that fit into the broader process and calculation? That is many times challenging.
So Neil, Rob just talked about the fact that we have a plethora of minimum taxes in the United States, KMT, BEAT. None of these things line up, of course, at all well with Pillar 2. So your perspective, are you seeing a lot of the same things that Rob is seeing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, certainly it's a huge amount, again, for companies to get their heads around by the time you're allowing, like a CAMT supposedly being also a book minimum tax regime, but really different drivers, which kind of are creating, people that have different profiles under one or the other tax. I think a lot of people, again, are flipping back to safe harbors and kind of thinking, can I get if my US business is in the safe harbor, then it takes away some of this huge complexity.
It turns it back into a tomorrow problem, like the U.S. multinationals.
Exactly. I think there's troubles with the safe harbor. And I think some of the guidance we saw in December really added further complexity. So especially where we see companies, which many of our clients do, operating through LLCs as part of their broader U.S. group, that brings in some challenges as to the way the rules operate, and they may kind of unintentionally get kind of worse safe harbor answer. Some of the questions around adjustments to the book top side and IFRS to local GAAP adjustment, like all of these things are really like the safe harbor is not as straightforward as a lot of companies would hope it to be to kind of fully comply, and so it's that's causing issues for their U.S. businesses.
Yep. So I have one more question for you guys, and I'm going to pick up, Neil, on your point about, you mentioned the December guidance. The OECD has issued a bunch of guidance. They've promised more guidance. For our inbound companies, a lot of them, they have to apply the rules in the various jurisdictions as written, but with the expectation that guidance is still to come. And in some cases, jurisdictions have not yet caught up to guidance that's already been issued. So how are companies confronting with that? How are they basically facing into that? Neil, maybe start with you on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I think it's harder than that. We've got some countries that have said they're going to have rules, but haven't even yet legislated for those rules, so they haven't got the final law. Then we've got like countries that have legislated and the law's not yet fully in line with the OECD guidance. Then we've got more guidance that we're expecting. And so I think just a massive struggle. It really is. And so like this is challenge of not really knowing like which rule do I apply, and significant uncertainty in a number of commercial transactions that they have going on, whether it's reorganizations that they're doing internally or just the way they go about hedging things, or kind of just aspects of it where there's kind of these differences or uncertainties within the rules, and it's they have to take a view on what the law says right now. But it's unfortunate that there's this big uncertainty hanging over them.
Yep. Rob, your thoughts on this?
I broadly agree. I mean, it's just the uncertainty puts companies in very difficult positions, and they're having to take reasonable interpretations and positions and thoughtfully approach this with the understanding that in many cases we're not going to know the direct application of the rules yet. And so I do think this is kind of a measured educational approach that's going to have to happen throughout the organization, that we're going to do the best we can.
Well, and presumably in some cases you close a quarter with the rules as they exist today, knowing that those rules are going to get changed, potentially even retroactively, so that your rate for the current quarter disclosed to your investors may very well be something that looks different as you look forward to the next quarter. And
it's a great point. And I think that volatility in rate is so important for so many companies that's just something that, it's kind of a bedrock to stay away from. But so trying to manage that is a very difficult prospect right now.
So there's a lot to think about. You've given us a lot more to think about. And for our U.S. multinational clients, I'm not sure whether it's something to look forward to, but something to be aware of. So Rob, Neil, thank you both for your insights. And thank you all for joining us. Take care.